before I could even process, there was this amazing white light to my left. I don't know if you got to that part of the book yet, but um, and I could look directly into that light and not need to squint or anything. I could just look at it like that. It's like looking at the sun and just like examining it. Except it's not the sun. It's a gazillion times the sun, but it's white light, not yellow light. And out of that light steps Jesus. And there's no communication verbally after this point. Everything is telepathic. And it's not that I was unable to speak. There's just no need to speak. I thought it, he responded in thought. And there's just no need. And I saw him and I knew it was him, but I dared not look at his face, so I just dropped at his feet. And I always say I could have stayed right near his toes right there and stayed all of eternity. Cancel the crowns and the golden mansions and the streets and all. I don't need all of that. And just right there at his feet, the bliss, the comfort, the peace, the pure perfection I felt in myself, that was enough for me. And I'm looking at his toes and I'm like, should I try to touch just the tip? I'm like this little child all over again. And I'm like, it's like your mom says, don't touch it. Don't touch it. And then you're like daring her. So I was like daring myself to touch his toe. And I didn't even get to. And I realized that he was bare feet too. Because at first I thought it was a sandal. Again, hence the name Bare Feet. And before I could even touch his toe, he lifted me up and I felt his arms around me and he cradled me as an adult. He cradled me like this on his chest. And there was no greater feeling than being cradled by him. And he said, and he was just touching my hair and he said, you can rest now. You can rest, you can sleep. It's over. And there was nothing more I needed to hear than to hear that it was over. And I snuggled on him, just like a newborn baby would. I snuggled on him, found my little comfy spot, and I slept. Sweetest sleep ever. And when I awoke, I was on this beach in heaven. And I was over his shoulder, like a 1-year-old or something. And so he was holding me like that. And I was just feeling his warmth and his energy. And I felt perfect. Like my most perfect body and self. Mentally, emotionally, everything was at its perfection. It was just perfection. I looked over my shoulder and I saw the back end of the beach. And the waters, I don't know, it was something about the water that just sucked me in. The beauty of those colors I have never seen. It's kind of like Earth, but a gazillion, trillion, gazillion, billion, trillion times 0.0. Like there's no comparison. And there were trees and rocks and sand and everything. And I looked behind and there were no footprints. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, so how come Jesus is leaving footprints, right? And he responded to my query, again, telepathically. He said, it's because you're not supposed to go back. And Lauren, I tried to feel sad. I actively tried to be sad at the fact that I'm not going to go back to my babies. Could not. It's impossible to feel fear or sadness or regret or anger or anything negative in the presence of Jesus. You cannot. Because he's all light. And with that, he put me down on the sand and I'm me, but I felt like a little kid. And because I'm squiggling my toes into the sand and, the feel of it was so different from on Earth because it was wet sand, but it was not clumpy. You could still separate each grain. But my eyesight, that blew my mind because I could look, I could stand and look at the sand and see each individual crystal and see the spaces between each individual crystal of sand. So I picked it up and was like, I'm looking at that, and I'm able to see the spaces between the crystals of sand. And each crystal was an actual crystal. It's not sand. They were crystals, but they weren't hurting my fingers or my toes because crystals are, can be sharp, right? And I could have stayed there and looked at each individual grain of sand and be very content for, I don't know, a million years or however long it took. That was the marvel. That was the incredulity of what heaven is. And when I was done, and Jesus was all laughing and smiling, and like a parent seeing their child discover something for the first time, so it was like he was reliving it with me, and probably saying, "Silly girl, she never saw sand like that," and but um, and then I looked at the water, and man, oh God, those blues. And to date, I can see those blues reflected in his eyes. When I did have the strength to look at his eyes, yes. There's a painting done by Akian. That is the closest I have ever seen to the true image of Jesus. Not when he was crucified, because when he was crucified in the shroud, his body would have been very battered and had taken on a different look. But the Jesus in his prime, that's the Jesus I saw. And his eyes were like, you read these cheesy lines, eyes were like swimming pools of love and all this kind of stuff. But it was so true. Like I could have just lost myself in the between blue and green and brown with the ever-changing shades of his eyes. But I was focused on the water and the life in the water, the fish. There were corals, there were, seaweeds, all of that. But everything had its own heartbeat almost. Everything pulsated at its own pace. But at the same time, they were all connected to God. So the water itself was alive. The water itself was alive. Each fish had its own personality and was alive. The stones and the pebbles in the water, same thing. And I was able to stand on the shore, of course, and I'm looking into the deep water and I was able to see the fish. My eyesight, my hearing, my sense of touch and smell, everything was just like, and I could see the skeletons of each fish and the colors and which direction they were going and who was hiding where and whatever. And it was so fascinating. But what was more fascinating was as Jesus walked, wherever he stopped, the water would stop. And the fish would stop. And even the seaweeds, the grass, everything would stand still in his presence. And I wondered at that, and then his response was, everything must stop to give me glory and honor, which is also written in the Bible. Even the stones shall shout, which are non-living things, right? But in heaven, everything is alive. And then he'd continue walking with me, and then the waves would continue, the ripples would continue, and so it went. And I just marveled at that. And I decided to look up, like, wait a minute, where are there no clouds? And his response, well, we don't need clouds. Why do we need clouds? We don't need rain. We don't need the sky. There is no sky. Everything here is limitless. You are limitless. So what you know on earth does not apply. We don't need that. So then the next logical question, well, where's the light coming from? Because there's no clouds, then there's no sky, there's no sun. So why do we need a sun? The light of God permeates everything and covers everything.